Something just broke that cannot be unbroken. Not a policy, not a tariff, not a press release, a relationship. The most powerful economic partnership in human history, the one that built highways, fed armies, and fueled a century of Western dominance, just cracked wide open. And the man who cracked it wasn't sitting in Beijing or Moscow. He was sitting in Ottawa. His name is Mark Carney, and 3 days ago, he did something no Canadian Prime Minister has dared to do in living memory. He looked the most powerful nation on earth directly in the eye, and he said no. Not, let's negotiate. Not, we need more time. A clean, surgical, devastating no. And the moment those words left his mouth, something seismic happened inside the financial markets, inside the Pentagon war rooms, inside the West Wing itself. Washington didn't celebrate. Washington didn't laugh. Washington panicked. That is the story you haven't been told correctly yet. That is the story that is about to change the price of your home, your groceries, your retirement, and the entire geopolitical order you grew up believing was permanent. Let me show you exactly what happened, step by step, because the details matter more than the headlines. It started before sunrise on a Tuesday, when Trump posted on Truth Social at 4:47 a.m., demanding that Canada immediately dismantle its strategic mineral export controls and hand over management of its Arctic energy corridors to a joint American oversight committee. The demand included a 72-hour deadline. It included a threat of 35% blanket tariffs on Canadian aluminum, lumber, steel, and agricultural goods if Ottawa refused. It was designed to feel like an ambush, sudden, overwhelming, non-negotiable, because that is Trump's entire method. Hit fast, hit loud, make the other side feel like resistance is futile. But Canada did not feel like resistance was futile. Canada felt like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. Mark Carney walked to the podium in Ottawa looking like a man who had rehearsed this in his sleep for 6 months. He didn't bring notes. He didn't bring a peace offering. He brought a counterweapon. In a calm, measured voice that sent shockwaves through every trading floor from New York to Tokyo, Carney announced that Canada would not comply with the demands, and that any tariff action from Washington would trigger an immediate Canadian moratorium on rare earth mineral exports to American defense contractors. Let that land for a second. Not a counter tariff on beer or orange juice, a direct strike on America's military supply chain: cobalt, lithium, nickel. The exact materials that go inside every F-35 fighter jet, every Patriot missile battery, every next-generation military drone the Pentagon has spent decades developing. Carney didn't threaten America's consumer economy. He threatened America's ability to build weapons. And Washington froze. Within 40 minutes of that press conference, something extraordinary happened that the mainstream media buried under political commentary. U.S. defense sector stocks began falling sharply. Major home builders followed within the hour. The Canadian dollar, which Trump's team had privately predicted would collapse under pressure, barely moved. This was not symbolic. This was the market, the coldest, most rational judge on the planet, rendering its verdict. And the verdict was brutal. The market was saying Canada holds cards Washington cannot afford to call. It was saying that Trump's leverage, the leverage he assumed was absolute, was significantly weaker than advertised. It was saying that the 72-hour ultimatum had just become a trap, and Washington had walked into it with both feet. Here is what the American media does not want to explain to you, because explaining it requires admitting something deeply uncomfortable. The United States military is dependent on Canada in ways that make the word ally sound almost laughably insufficient. Canada doesn't just supply raw materials to American industry. Canada supplies the irreplaceable inputs to American national security itself. The Pentagon's entire modernization program, the shift toward hypersonic weapons, next-generation stealth aircraft, advanced missile defense, runs on Canadian cobalt and Canadian nickel and Canadian lithium. There is no substitution timeline that doesn't stretch years into the future. There is no alternative supplier that doesn't involve routing materials through countries the Pentagon trusts even less than it currently trusts Ottawa. When Carney activated the mineral restriction threat, he wasn't playing an economic card. He was holding a national security card directly against America's throat, and every general in the Pentagon knew it instantly. Sources inside 2 major American defense contractors confirmed that supply chain emergency teams were mobilized within hours of Carney's statement. These are not junior logistics coordinators. These are senior procurement officers who report directly to the boardroom. They were scrambling to model scenarios in which Canadian mineral exports dropped by even 20%, and the numbers they were generating were catastrophic. Project delays measured in years, contract penalties measured in billions, weapon systems that exist on paper but cannot be built on schedule because the materials simply aren't there. The Pentagon isn't panicking because of political theater. It is panicking because the arithmetic is unambiguous. You cannot bluff your way out of a supply chain crisis. Either the minerals arrive or the weapons don't get built. It is that simple. And Mark Carney knows exactly how simple it is. Now let's talk about what Carney was doing while Trump was rage-posting insults at 6 a.m. He was on the phone with Berlin. He was on the phone with Paris. He was on the phone with Tokyo and Canberra and Seoul, not to complain, not to seek sympathy, to build architecture. Carney is one of the most deeply connected figures in the entire global financial establishment. He chaired the Financial Stability Board. He ran 2 G7 central banks. He has personal relationships with the decision-makers at the IMF, the World Bank, the European Central Bank, and every major sovereign wealth fund on the planet. While Trump was operating like a man playing checkers, Carney was already 3 moves into chess. He was drafting the outline of a critical minerals security compact, a multilateral agreement between Canada, the EU, Australia, Japan, and South Korea, designed to create a Western mineral supply chain that deliberately excludes American market dominance. Not punishes America, excludes it. Structurally routes around it as though it were an unreliable node in a network. The geopolitical consequences of that compact, if formalized, are generational. It means the United States loses its guaranteed access to the resource base that powers its military and its green energy transition simultaneously. It means the leverage Trump assumed he held permanently evaporates, not in a crisis, but systematically, quietly, irreversibly. Meanwhile, inside the West Wing, the situation was deteriorating in ways the press briefings were carefully designed to hide. Economic advisors were not aligned with political strategists. The economic team was running recession probability models that were producing deeply alarming outputs. They understood what Trump's political team refused to accept, that tariffs on Canadian lumber don't punish Canada, they punish American homebuyers. That tariffs on Canadian aluminum don't punish Ottawa, they punish American manufacturers in Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania, in the exact states whose working-class voters Trump cannot afford to lose. The economic advisors were reportedly describing the tariff escalation internally as self-inflicted damage. They were saying it out loud in meetings. They were being ignored, because Trump's political operation doesn't run on economic models. It runs on optics. And the optic they needed was a Canadian capitulation that Trump could parade in front of his base as a victory. But Carney refused to provide that capitulation. And now Trump is imprisoned by his own ultimatum. He has to follow through, or he looks weak. But if he follows through, the economic damage begins accumulating in real time, in real communities, with real consequences that show up in real polling data 8 months before the midterm elections. Trump is caught in a trap that Carney designed with surgical precision and the patience of a man who has navigated financial crises before. This is not the first time Carney has sat across a table from catastrophe. In 2008, when global banks were collapsing like dominoes, Carney was at the helm of the Bank of Canada, and not a single major Canadian bank failed. Not one. While American institutions were being nationalized and British banks were begging for government lifelines, Carney's institutions held firm because he had quietly fortified them years before the crisis hit, anticipating the fracture points that others refused to see. He is doing exactly the same thing now. He saw Trump coming. He modeled the leverage. He identified the fracture points in American economic armor. He positioned Canada's assets precisely where they would cause maximum strategic discomfort. And he waited. He waited for Trump to throw the first punch. Because when Trump throws the first punch, Carney gets to respond. And responding is always stronger than initiating when you are the smaller party facing a superpower. Asymmetric strategy only works if you are disciplined enough to absorb the opening blow without flinching, and Carney did not flinch. The bond markets registered it immediately. The currency markets registered it within hours. And now the political markets inside Washington are registering it, which is the most dangerous registration of all for Trump. Republican senators from timber-dependent states are not releasing statements of support for the tariffs. They are calling their donors. They are calling their chambers of commerce. They are hearing the same thing from every direction. This is going to hurt us before it hurts Canada. The coalition that Trump needs to sustain a prolonged economic confrontation with Ottawa is fracturing before the confrontation has even formally begun. And Carney knows this timeline better than anyone, because he understands that Trump's political window is not infinite. Every week that passes without a Canadian capitulation is a week where American costs rise, and American patience erodes, and American businesses start lobbying against their own president. The question everyone in Washington is now asking quietly, behind closed doors, away from cameras, is the question no one wants to say on the record. Did Trump miscalculate? Did he fundamentally misread Canada's willingness and capacity to absorb economic pain in defense of sovereignty? Did he assume the old playbook would work one more time? That Ottawa would blink? That Carney would send quiet envoys? That a face-saving formula would emerge in 48 hours? And did he build an entire political strategy on that assumption, only to discover that Canada had changed and he had not? The evidence suggests yes. The markets suggest yes. The silence from Republican border state senators suggests yes. The emergency mobilization inside Pentagon procurement teams suggests yes. Everything in the data suggests that Trump activated a confrontation he is not structurally positioned to win. And that Carney not only anticipated this, but planned for it with the methodical precision of a central banker who has spent 20 years thinking about systemic risk. So where does this end, and why should you care about the answer? You should care because this ends somewhere on a spectrum between painful and catastrophic, and your position on that spectrum depends entirely on how long both men hold firm. If this drags into months, you will feel it at the hardware store. You will feel it at the grocery checkout. You will feel it in your energy bill and your mortgage rate and your investment portfolio. The North American economy is not two separate systems that can be surgically separated without bleeding. It is one organism built over 30 years of deliberate integration, and tearing it apart is not a political exercise. It is economic surgery without anesthesia, performed on a fully conscious patient. Who votes? Canada just activated the kill switch, and Washington is panicking, because for the first time in a generation, the most loyal ally America has ever had decided that loyalty has a limit. That limit has a name. It is called sovereignty. And Mark Carney just made the entire world watch him defend it.